Good morning, everyone. I am Jo Flick with the Montana State Library, and with me here today is Misty LaPlant. Misty has she has been working in law enforcement in the state of Montana for a while, and she has recently taken a new position as the missing persons specialist for our state. And so she has a very big job to get the word out and to help coordinate between different agencies in the state to help all of us address the alarming issue of missing persons. So Misty, I'll just hand things over to you, and I'll be keeping track of the chat box. So if you have questions or comments, please put them there and I'll bring them to Misty's attention. Okay? Go ahead, Misty.
Alrighty, thanks so much and good morning, everyone. I'm excited because this is my very first webinar type training. I've never done one, and I just wanted to thank everybody for joining and coming to educate yourself about this important issue in Montana. Joe talked a little bit about my background. So before I came here, I worked as a police officer for Blackfeet tribal law enforcement. And after that, I worked as a Glacier County deputy. And I also have an educational background in social work. So there are a couple different things that make my perspective on this issue a very unique one, in that I know quite a bit about jurisdictions, tribal, federal, state, county, city, and then, having the social work piece to all of it really rounds out my experience, I believe. So I'll jump right into it, and thank you all again for coming.
Well, Misty, this is Joe just jumping in here. The weirdest thing about a webinar is that you don't have anybody looking back at you, nodding their heads, and or raising their hands. And so you just have to imagine that everyone is, really listening to you, because I think there's just a great deal of interest in this topic. So once you get past that, you'll be fine.
Sure. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. So when I usually do presentations, I really like it to be active conversation. So if you guys have any comments or questions or anything, just go ahead and jump right in, and Joe will let me know, and I'll try to get those answered for you. I don't have a ton of slides today, but the content, there's so much to it, and yeah, I hope you enjoy. So I have been the missing person specialist for about 5 months now. Prior to my coming to this position in Helena, this is brand new. Nobody has ever done this before, and this position came out of House Bill 21, aka Hannah's Act. And this House Bill was named Hannah's Act in remembrance of Hannah Harris, who went missing and was later found deceased in Lame Deer on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. This bill specifically states that the Montana Department of Justice may assist in the investigation of all missing person cases, regardless of age. Some of my responsibilities include providing guidance and support to law enforcement agencies and families in search of missing persons, overseeing accurate and timely missing person entries into CGIN and NCIC databases, managing and improving the Montana Missing Person Clearinghouse, providing training to law enforcement agencies and public outreach, and then I'll be responsible for launching alerts such as Amber Alert and MIPAs, or Missing Endangered Person Advisories. A lot of what I've done so far is connecting with families and law enforcement agencies across the state in regard to missing person cases. Sometimes, not sometimes, but a lot of the time, I'll go out and look on social media and see people saying, oh, my sister or my dad or my family member hasn't been home, nobody's seen him, this is not like this person, can somebody keep an eye out or have them call home? And then I'll go and look into our databases, and they're not entered as a missing person, which means this wasn't reported to law enforcement. So I think that it's really important to have a good relationship with law enforcement agencies and also to get the word out there that I'm here as a resource for, everybody who needs guidance or assistance in regard to missing persons. I've also been updating the missing persons clearinghouse, which was pretty outdated, and it just wasn't what it should be in 2020. So I will give you more information about that and how you can look at it, and also maybe you guys can give me some recommendations on how you feel, it should look like. In addition to all of those things I just talked about, I just wanted to clearly state that although I have prior law enforcement experience in this role, I'm not an investigator. I am more of a liaison between families and law enforcement, and a trainer as well to make sure that everybody's up to date on the new laws and protocol and all of that. So I think it's really important to understand that I'm not a boots on the ground investigator. I'm not going to show up and do searches, but I'm always here to also help in any way that I can. So please just keep that in mind. In addition to House Bill 21, which established my missing person specialist position, there were additional legislative updates that all became effective as of October 1st, 2019. So we had House Bill 20, which requires the filing of a missing child report in cases of custodial interference if the whereabouts of the involved child are unknown. And this is really important because if you'll refer back to the Washington State child homicide study, I'm not going to quote the exact statistics right now, but I can get them to you afterwards if you guys are interested. But that study actually stated that children who are taken or abducted by non-custodial parents are more likely to be killed by that parent. So in the state of Montana, obviously we felt that's important, and so if any child goes missing or is taken by a non-custodial parent, we're required to report that child missing. Where previously, law enforcement might say, hey, that's a civil matter, you got to go take that up with the courts. Now we are entering these children as missing. Moving on to House Bill 54. This isn't very new. This was always established in federal law, but we now have it mandated in state law. So this law requires all law enforcement agencies in the state to accept missing person reports without delay. When law enforcement agencies take these reports, they have a time limit and required to enter people under 21 into criminal justice information databases such as CGIN or NCIC. And if you're under 21, you have to be into this database within 2 hours. And if you're 21 or over, you'll be entered in there within 8 hours. That's a little bit confusing if you're not sure about databases, and I'll go over that in a later slide. But also, please don't get this confused with reporting time. You should always report somebody missing immediately, and there is no wait time or wait period for you to report somebody missing. I think it's a common myth that people think they have to wait 24 or 48 hours to report their loved one missing, and that's not true. It's never been true. So I encourage you, should this ever happen, to report immediately. These timeframes that I'm talking about with House Bill 54 are specific to law enforcement agencies. Also keep in mind that this doesn't mean they're going to wait 2 or 8 hours to look for somebody. It's just a required time frame for them to enter them into existing databases.
So Misty,
Moving on to Senate bills.
I wonder if I
Yeah.
could just get you to maybe clarify a few of the acronyms on your report. Um, the
Sure.
CGIN and NCIC, those are
Mm-hmm.
what?
Yeah, so these are existing criminal justice databases. Only criminal justice agencies or law enforcement agencies have access to these databases. And so CGIN or CJIN is the Criminal Justice Information Network, and that
Okay.
is specific to Montana. And NCIC is the federal criminal justice database, and it's accessible throughout the United States and in some parts of Canada.
Thank you so much.
No problem. And if I'm going too fast through this, please feel free to slow me down.
I'll do that, but you're doing just fine.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to Senate Bill 312, which established the Missing Indigenous Person Task Force. I serve as a member of that task force from the Montana Department of Justice, and I'll talk a bit more about that in the next slide, but it also established the Looping in Native Communities or LINK grant program coordinator, which is Tina Chamberlain. She and I were hired around the same time, and we work very closely together, um, doing trainings and public outreach for specific to missing Indigenous persons. So the Missing Indigenous Persons Task Force is made up of representatives from the 8 tribal nations of Montana. I can get you a list of those, but I'll name the individuals from the tribal nations off really quick. So Fort Peck tribal representative is Pat Ironcloud. Rocky Boy is currently vacant. Fort Belknap is currently vacant. Blackfeet tribal representative is Mark Pollock. The Crow tribal representative is Valerie Fallsdown. Northern Cheyenne tribal representative is Teresa Small. And the CSKT Salish and Kootenai tribal representative is Lee Ellen Bundy McLeod. And the most recent tribal recognition of the Little Shell has always had a representative since the task force has been established, and that is Iris Kill Eagle. In addition to those tribal representatives on the task force, there is also Melissa Schlichting, who is the Deputy Attorney General, and she is our presiding officer. We also have Derek Werner with the Highway Patrol, Dr. Steve Williamson with Indian Health Service, Jared Cobell with the United States Attorney's Office, and myself as we round out the entire task force. Our 5th meeting was held on the 13th of February, so just a little bit earlier this month, and all of our meetings are open to the public, and we usually rotate between Great Falls and Billings, and so since our last meeting was in Billings, we will be in Great Falls for our next meeting. And
Where do you
go
hold
ahead.
those meetings, Misty?
So it just depends on the venue. We've usually held them at the Doubletree in
Uh-huh.
Billings and then at the Heritage Inn in Great Falls, but it just depends on availability.
Right.
But once we do schedule a meeting, the notice is put out on the state calendar and also pushed out to media.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the Missing Indigenous Person Task Force, their whole goal is to determine the scope of the problem, improve jurisdictional barriers, increase reporting, and improve investigation of Indigenous missing person cases. So this is a very new task force. Just in our recent meeting, we talked a lot about what our recommendations would be to the next legislative session on what we think could be very tangible in helping to address some of the problems and issues that we've learned over the past 5 months in regard to missing Indigenous person cases. So Tina and I have set up several community meetings across the state and are still continuing to do so, where we go in and we do a little bit of presentations, kind of similar to the one I'm doing now. So we let people know what we're doing, and then we also ask members of the public very basic questions, and the same questions every time is like, what is expected of the task force? What are barriers? What are challenges? What are successes? And, you know, just have them talk to us as experts in their community on how they view this issue. And in turn, we go back to the entire task force, and we're gathering all this information to make an informed recommendation to the State and Tribal Relations Intermain Committee to maybe have some legislation in place next year to help address these problems.
I'm just going to add
So
here,
Montana,
I'm just going to jump in because we do have a few people from out of state. Montana's legislature meets only every other year, and then only for about 3 months. So there's a lot of work that goes on between legislative sessions to prepare legislation and get things ready, but we really only have these windows every other year to advance legislation in our state. So just a note there.
yeah, thank you for that. And it's important to also say that if, you know, if the next legislative session doesn't reapprove, I guess, the missing Indigenous person task force, then it goes away. And I would really hate for this task force to go away, because it's so important in understanding the issue, but also helping to recommend possible ways to address the situation.
That's a good
So
point.
in Montana, yeah, sure. So in Montana, missing persons is very unique. It's very different than other states, such as, you know, Washington, North Dakota, surrounding states. It's different for a number of reasons, and I'm going to go over those, but after I give you some statistics. So as of today, in Montana, we have 145 total missing persons listed in our clearinghouse. This number fluctuates frequently as people are entered as missing or cleared or located. So with that being said, the most recent data that I guess I should go back and clarify. So the data that I get comes directly from these databases that I talked about, CGIN and NCIC. And in order for me to extract data from there specific to, say I'm going to see how many Indigenous missing people there are, I have to get with one of our tech people to help me do that. It isn't, it's easily accessible, but there's a process to it. So I wasn't able to get with my person yesterday, and so I'm going to give you some information from February 4th. On February 4th, there were a total of 148 missing people in Montana, and of those 148, 40 of them were identified as Indigenous. So at that time, on February 4th, Indigenous people made up 20% of the missing persons list, which is still very concerning because Indigenous people only make up from about 7 to 10% of the population in Montana. And so the percentage is always very high on the missing person list. In the last 5 months since I've been here, the highest percentage of missing Indigenous persons has been 31%, and the lowest has been down to 20%. So it fluctuates all the time, and right now we're creeping back up there. So I hope to, stay on top of it and keep networking so we can keep these numbers down and make sure that we're finding these people. In 2018, there were a total of 1,846 people entered as missing in the state. Please keep in mind that these are the numbers of entries, and so that could also mean that one person has ran away multiple times. So we had a total of 118 entries. Also, for this year, I don't have the exact number yet. I'm working with my person to get that data, but I believe it is over 2,000 entries for 2019. I saw a couple of chats. Joe, are there any questions?
Couple of things, just people were asking a little bit about the acronyms, but I think I was able to clarify that you use CSKT, which in Montana, most of us know that you're referring to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, and you did explain that really quickly, but I put that in the chat. A person asked about your slides and whether or not you'd be able to send those to me so I could post them at the end. I don't know if that's okay, but if it is, I'd be happy to do that. And that was it.
Yeah, sure. I'll send you these slides, and I'll also send you some analysis that I've done. As I explained earlier, these numbers are fluctuating all the time. So one of the analysis that I've done specific to missing Indigenous persons was conducted on 11/15 of 2019. And so then we had a total of 150 people missing in Montana, and 31 of them were identified as Native American. And what's interesting about that analysis that I did, to me was interesting, is that we have more missing Indigenous males than females. And you constantly hear of the acronym MMIW, or Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, when in fact in Montana, I and others like to emphasize MMIP, or Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons, because our data here shows that we have more missing males than females. And so at the time I conducted that analysis, there were 16 missing males and 15 missing females that were identified as Indigenous. So
that is very interesting, because the people, I think we hear more about missing women, and there's maybe more activism around that group, and that is very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'll share a PowerPoint of that analysis that really breaks down quite a few different things. It also was interesting to me that of the 31 missing Indigenous people, that 17 of them were what I would identify as long-term missing, or have been missing for over a year. So there are a bunch of really, really interesting things on this analysis, and I'll be sure and share that with you so you can share with the group.
Great. So if you are attending today, I have captured your information, and I will make sure that you get this follow-up information.
I just wanted to share a map of Montana and some of the tribes that we have here. The only tribe that isn't listed on this map is the Little Shell tribe. So they are, and sorry, that's a horrible focus picture, but the Little Shell tribe is established around Great Falls, and with their recent federal recognition, I just learned yesterday that Tribal Chairman Gray is looking for 200 acres of land where they'll establish. I'm not exactly sure, what their plans are yet, but they'll have 200 acres of land wherever they want, and I would assume it would be in the Great Falls area. So they are located in Cascade County and around Great Falls. If you can see the box number 1, that's the Blackfeet tribe. Number 2 would be Rocky Boy. Number 3 would be Fort Belknap. Number 4 would be Fort Peck. Number 5 would be Flathead, or CSKT, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe. Number 6 would be the Crow, and number 7 is the Northern Cheyenne tribe. So we're all over, we have reservations all over in the state of Montana, and well, I just have that laid out for you to understand where those reservations are if you're not from Montana. Another interesting thing that I learned in some of my analysis is that most indigenous people go missing off the reservation. So it's just something to keep in mind for the librarians out there who aren't on or bordering the reservation. So when I refer to MMPC, I'm talking about the Montana Missing Person Clearinghouse, and this is the website that I help oversee. On the left here, we have just a screenshot of what missing person entries look like. And I also have a link if, well, we'll share this PowerPoint so you can have that. But I highly encourage you guys to take down this website and review it every day so you can see who we have missing in Montana. And this is how the MMPC works. So law enforcement agencies will take a missing person report and enter it into the criminal justice databases I was talking about, so CJIN and NCIC. Our state database, CJIN, copies this entry and uploads it directly to the clearinghouse. And this happens in real time. So when law enforcement enters a person as missing, it immediately goes onto the website. And as they're located or cleared, it immediately comes off the website. And so what I've been teaching the public is if you have reported somebody missing, you can always go and double check that law enforcement has entered them into these databases because it will become available on this public website. The public does not have access to CJIN or NCIC, but in regard to missing persons, you will have all the information through the website. And it's updated in real time. It's constantly changing. This morning we were at 145 total missing Montanans, and by now that could have easily changed.
It looks like the website also has some good resources, PDF files and other documents that will be of interest.
Yeah, and also I'm working on, well, I've helped to also just make it mobile friendly, but I'm also working on other tabs to do like a missing person template if you wanted to make a poster, and some other ideas that I have to get going on this website. So here's, it's tough to understand the database part of it, so I made a little graphic here on how they're connected. So CJIN, or the Criminal Justice Information Network, is the state database specific to Montana. NCIC is the federal database. So CJIN and NCIC talk to each other. And when information about missing persons is entered or cleared, CGIN and NCIC are always on the same page about that, or the same understanding, same information in regard to those entries and about missing persons. So although CGIN and NCIC talk, the clearinghouse is not connected to NCIC. So CGIN shoots off another little message and that immediately becomes available to the clearinghouse, or the Montana Missing Person Clearinghouse, the Montana Missing Person website. How many people, well, since I can't get a response, but NamUs is a federal tool. So it's another database that helps, it's open and available to the public, that helps to enter missing persons, but also deals with unidentified persons as well. And so anybody can go and make an account, and if you wanted to report somebody missing, you could do it through NamUs, but please keep in mind that if you enter someone missing to NamUs, it doesn't necessarily go straight to a law enforcement agency. So I would encourage you, should you ever have to report a missing person, to call or contact law enforcement immediately, but also utilize this public tool. So there is a regional manager for NamUs, and her name is Jessica Hager. If she receives an entry, she has to vet that information with a law enforcement agency and make sure that it was reported before it can be posted to NamUs. So it's just an extra tool that's available. NamUs isn't connected to any of the databases that I've talked about, but what I'm doing in my role is entering cases that I see in CGIN that have been in there for 3 months or longer into NamUs. And I'm not required to do that, but I've been doing it just as an extra measure, and dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's so we can help get information out there that's available to people. Some states require law enforcement agencies to enter missing persons into NamUs. Montana does not, but like I said, I've been doing that. So I hope this little graphic here helps everybody to understand a bit more about the databases and how they are connected or not connected.
Misty, I think your experience in working with different jurisdictions must come in very handy in your job. I mean, I don't mean to laugh about this because it's a very serious subject, but wow, just so many different layers to try for different law enforcement agencies and federal and state, and it's a little mind-boggling.
Yeah, so I would definitely say that my experience has been helpful, and I think it's important to know that there isn't one SOP or one overarching protocol for any law enforcement agency. They develop their own and how they want to respond or what their procedures are for missing persons. And so it's really important not only to understand the basics about jurisdiction, but also what your specific local law enforcement agency's response or protocol is for missing person cases, because they're all so different. I can tell you that the way they do it on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation is much different from, Great Falls City Police Department. And so you'll just have to be mindful about how different they are, and that there isn't one right way to respond to these cases. So a lot of times people will ask me, how can I help? And the reality is that missing persons is a big umbrella, an overarching issue to several underlying social issues. They're all connected in some way, and so you have missing persons, but that can also potentially be related to human trafficking, domestic violence, suicide, drug and alcohol abuse. So there are all these other social problems that come into play when you try to understand the issue of missing persons. So as librarians across the state, and out of the state, I guess I would advise you to become familiar and utilize the MMPC, or the Montana Missing Person Clearinghouse. Know who the missing people are in your area. You can filter out for your specific location who the missing people are, and so I would encourage you to check it daily to see who these people are. And you never know if someone who is reported missing might come in and to the library and utilize the computer or Wi-Fi or something like that. So please look at the clearinghouse. I would also encourage you to become familiar with resources and tools such as NamUs. If you know how to use NamUs, and it's very simple. If anybody ever wants me to walk them through the process, I could do that. Please let me know or send me an email, and I can help you do that. But someone might walk into the library who wants to report a missing person, and I think that could be easily done with a phone call to law enforcement and also making an entry into NamUs. I would encourage you to learn how to report a missing person and serve as a resource for community members who may not know how to report a loved one missing. It's not a entirely hard process. To report a missing person, call your local law enforcement agency immediately. You can even call 911. Every missing person is an emergency, and so I would encourage you to call law enforcement immediately. On top of that, I kind of touched on this a bit, but go to your local law enforcement agency and talk to them about what their department's response is for a missing person case, and don't be afraid to offer yourself as a resource. So what I've learned in my travels across the state is that law enforcement agencies are working with other programs and departments to do different things as a way of responding to these cases. So I can give you an example. The Northern Cheyenne tribal, not tribal, but BIA, or Bureau of Indian Affairs, law enforcement works directly with their tribal programs to, once they get a missing person report, it sort of sets off a ripple effect. So law enforcement has their jobs, but they also work with the search and rescue team, who will make posters and flyers and distribute them. And so it's really a team effort. And if you're interested in, maybe helping to do something like that, don't be afraid to team up with your local law enforcement agency so you can help in that way. Also identifying local MMIP, or missing indigenous person work groups. So when I talk about MMIP work group, what I'm really referring to is local task force. So a good example of that is over on the Flathead Reservation. Their tribe has established a work group, and it's the similar thing to Northern Cheyenne, where they have a bunch of different departments and programs, including law enforcement and social work and their tribal council. They're all working together to help identify these problems, working on ways where they can respond quicker, and just really having people and programs develop and establish relationships to work on addressing this issue. There are different work groups across the state. If not, maybe you can help to make a work group. I think it's super important to know what resources are available in the community and how you can help in that way.
I know there are many librarians who are interested in providing programs at their library on this issue, Misty. So your best suggestion to them is to begin with a local sheriff's department or city police department or tribal police.
Yeah, and that's important. Going back to number 4 is because and it's so different the way law enforcement agencies respond. But if you live on a reservation, are you going to contact tribal police? Or are you going to contact the county?
Yeah.
Who's going to take care of what? So I know not everybody on the group today is on the reservation, but it's going to be very, very different everywhere you go. So just asking those questions to your law enforcement agency on, who they prefer somebody to contact and that sort of thing is going to be very beneficial.
So I have a couple of questions that have come in before you leave this slide. One was, do you have any suggestions on how to approach someone who you mentioned somebody might come into the library to use a computer, and if you suspect or quite sure they might be on one of these lists, how do you approach someone who might be listed as missing? What's your
You don't even
recommendation?
necessarily, sure. So you don't necessarily even have to approach them yourself. What happens for law enforcement to be able to clear this person from the list is that they'll have to make contact and just check their well-being. And so I would encourage you to contact your local law enforcement agency and let them know that you believe there's a missing person in the library, and they'll, in a perfect world, they'll show up and everything will be okay. The reality is that it's not illegal to be a missing person, and so sometimes people just don't want to be found, and that's okay. But as long as law enforcement or somebody verifies that this person is okay, then that's fine. They're just cleared from the list. Instead of approaching them yourself, I would encourage you to report it to the local law enforcement agency.
Thanks. And just a note from our chat box is that in Rosebud County, the library is hosting a speaker on human trafficking next month on March 17th at 5:30. So that's a related topic, and you might not know about that, but certainly we do live in an area that is bordering Canada and has some human trafficking issues in our state. And so I know that's another, you'd mentioned that as kind of a related issue to missing persons, human trafficking. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about what you're seeing statewide on that.
Sure. So when I say that there is a nexus, I don't have, actual numbers and contributing cases. And the reality is that there is human trafficking in Montana, but I would also say that a majority of the missing person cases that we see in Montana are runaway juveniles. And so although human trafficking is there, I can't tell you exact numbers of how much it is related to missing persons, but I can tell you that most of the missing people in Montana are runaway kids, and also that it is, I don't want to say rare, but I don't see it a whole lot where these cases turn out to be human trafficking. And again, I don't investigate that part. I do work with our newly established human trafficking investigators here at the Montana Department of Justice. And so any information that I get that could be related to human trafficking, I forward to them. I hope that helps to clarify that part.
Yes, and so the Homeland Security, the folks who manage our borders, Customs and Border Patrol, and they have some resources online for individuals called the Blue Campaign. I've looked at some of the videos and resources they have, and I think that librarians might want to just check some of those out, just for your own education would be maybe a good staff program to watch some of those. They're like scenario kind of videos. So if you do suspect it's human trafficking, explains how to report that. You can always call 911, as you pointed out, too.
Yes. And in fact, I encourage people when they call law enforcement to dial 911, because 911 lines are recorded. And so it's always documented, for whatever reason that you made a report.
And just to follow up follow up in Forsyth, the library in the Rosebud County Library in Forsyth, that the speaker they're having next month is Stephanie Page from the Stories Foundation. I'm not familiar with that group, and that she's also there to speak to schools and in Colstrip as well. So
great. And there are also, I just went to a human trafficking summit, but there are several human trafficking task forces around the state. So you could also look up task forces around your area, and they're a good resource for trainings on that topic as well. I'm just getting ready to wrap up my presentation here, and so I just wanted to list a couple resources for you. We have the NamUs website, and then the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which we call NCMEC. It's www.missingkids.com. They have lists of missing kids from across the United States. They have templates for posters and just tons of different resources in regard to missing and exploited children. I would encourage you to watch that, to review that website, because I think it could be especially helpful for resources for community members. And then a website I like to share is 1800runaway.org. And so this website has a online chat, a text number for parents having trouble with runaway juveniles, or kids who are contemplating running away, or kids who have ran away and are trying to get home. And so I look at this quite a bit, and I think there are really great resources. There is also a curriculum for teachers in talking about these hard issues surrounding running away. So that's a great resource as well.
I'll just point out several of the people on our call this morning, or on our webinar, I know work directly with young people, that they run team programs or after school programs at their libraries. These sound like really good resources to maybe consider doing a program with some of these kids about some of these issues. Because wouldn't you say that, especially with young people, that that they may know something about a friend before they leave and go missing, and giving those kids access to these resources might prevent a missing person.
Yeah, definitely. So in my experience, kids always know where their friends are, and they always know what's going on before something escalating to running away does happen. So I think it's great that if you're able to get through to them, you know, with those programs, it's going to be good in a way of awareness, but also being safe, internet safety, app safety, watching for predators and those kinds of things. So I think it's so important to reach out to the youth and try to get through to them.
Well, our libraries are really good at that.
Yes, I remember, I'm not that old, but I remember going to public libraries as a kid. And so I was excited when I was asked to do this presentation, because it's a resource that I wouldn't have thought about, but definitely utilized and know that other people utilize. I still bring my daughters to the public library, so I'm really happy to have done this presentation today.
So I'm going to unmute microphones here. If anyone wants to jump in and ask any other questions of Misty while we have her here, and also your slide says thank you, but really we should thank you, Misty. I know how busy you are, and it was very nice for you to take time out to be able to introduce this subject and also introduce yourself to our libraries. Let's see, as a comment here from Colleen, and Colleen is up in Harlem, Montana. So her library has been working to do a program for the public on this issue for quite a while. And so who do you suggest that she contact as a presenter? Sometimes that can be really frustrating if you're not connected to the law enforcement community in your area. Finding a presenter can be challenging.
A presenter specific to missing persons, or well, for the state, I would be that person, but I would also look around at different advocates, because sometimes they have I guess just a different perspective and way of presenting in surrounding MMIP and human trafficking. And so I would definitely be open to coming and doing a training similar to this, but there are also local advocates for the issue that I would also recommend. I can check around for the Harlem area and see if I know anybody around there.
So it sounds like Misty says it's okay to contact her, and I can tell you that she is very responsive. So a phone or email works, and maybe just follow up with her, Colleen. And then the next time she's up in your neck of the woods, you can get a program together. There's a nice comment here from New Mexico. Valerie in New Mexico said she joined because even though this is very focused on Montana, it's certainly happening all over, and interesting to see what we're doing in our state to try to coordinate between different jurisdictions and different layers of government and different law enforcement agencies to try to address the issue, and also what we're doing here today, reaching out to the public and trying to get people better informed about it. I mean, just the at the very beginning of your presentation, and I kind of want to reiterate this because it's probably one of the most important things you said, was that you should report a missing person right away. That myth that you have to wait 24 hours. I know we watch too many cop shows on TV, I guess, because that is, you should report them right away. And even though law enforcement may have a deadline on when they have to put things into databases, that doesn't, you don't need to wait. You can just tell if your patron comes in and says, I don't know where my grandchild is, hand them the phone and tell them to call 911.
Yeah. So, the other thing is I know that a lot of people are hesitant to report to law enforcement, and it's always been, that way. So I think that also knowing my information and knowing that I can help with whatever, if you have a question, if you need help calling a law enforcement agency. Anything that I can do to help and getting my information out there is important too, because when I see missing person cases on social media that haven't been reported to law enforcement, or I see a missing person on my list who I should be, I should be reaching out to their family. The reality is I don't have, Joe Smith's cell phone number up in Fort Peck or over in Glendive. And so knowing my information and using me as a resource is also important, because I'm just one person. And so if I need to connect with people throughout the state, it's amazing to network with all of you and all the other connections that I've made in doing this type of outreach. So thank you for that.
And a couple of comments are just that this is really excellent information and pretty invaluable. And this is, I think for our librarians, this is, this isn't something anybody got taught in library school. And yet as a community center, and libraries are more and more finding themselves in a position of being the place in the community where people go to look for all kinds of information. And that's appropriate. And we just want them to be well informed and connected so that they can help patrons get to the resources they need as quickly as possible. So we're coming up to the end of our hour here, but we will stay online if you have any specific questions, or if there's something you want to ask Misty that you don't want included in our recording today, just stay online and we'll be happy to have that conversation with you. So thank you again, Misty, for all your hard work and all the good work that you're doing, and for sharing what you know about this topic with us today.
Thanks again for having me as a presenter.